Most of the information that we're going to talk about has an originating source in the Sumerian culture. We may not be seeing Sumerian pieces, but we know from the historical and archaeological record that that came from Sumerian culture because they find multiple versions of many tablets. A lot of times in the old days when they conquered different civilizations or different city-states, they didn't wipe out their documents. They simply copied them because in their history, the gods were leading a lot of the wars, and the gods were related. So they didn't have a reason to wipe out their memory. In fact, it was the opposite. They wanted to copy it so everybody could be exposed to the information. These are all Sumerians. None of these are gods. This is the king Judea or Gudea. They are usually shown in a position of reverence to their gods, very religious people. They write a lot of stories about dealing with their gods and working with them, feeding them, taking care of them in the temples. And a lot of the records that are found, and these people produced over 1 million tablets. It's not like there's a small amount of information. There's a huge amount of data out there to study. And it also seems that there maybe cannot be much new stuff discovered that would counteract what we already know. When you get 1 million tablets, you can pretty much see a good picture of what they were trying to leave behind. Most of the tablets are called administrative tablets. I sold the farmer some barley and he gave me some sheep. We recorded on a little clay tablet and we made a transaction and they saved that. Of course, a lot of the tablets are religious stories and other kind of information that we're going to find out. So in Western civilization, this culture is said to have sprung up out of nowhere and produced a civilization that left 1 million tablets behind and many, many structures and city-states with evidence and libraries behind. Now, it is the oldest writing that we have complete forms for, like where we have 1 million tablets. That's very rare in the ancient world. There is other type of writing and tablets found, but it's not a complete story. It may not be translatable. That's what's different about the Sumerian stuff left behind. It is so voluminous. There is just so much of it. This is the area where the Sumerians lived. Does it look familiar to anybody who's watched the news lately? We are occupying this, and it's not going very well, is it? The oldest settlements are in the bottom area here, but this is the Tigris and Euphrates River. Here's Baghdad. There's the Gulf. So the oldest settlements are in the city of Eridu or Uruk, Lagash, and they come up this way. As this Sumerian civilization prospered, at least in the very ancient stories, it came up this way. So up here we have Syria, and we're going to have Turkey here, and tablets were found all over here. So the oldest tablets, the oldest languages were found here, and then as it comes up here, it becomes more closer to our time frame. This city of Ur is where the Bible says Abraham was born. Abraham was born in Ur Kasdim. His father and grandfather were priests in this area called Sumer. And then he was told to leave, of course, and go somewhere else. And after he left, in the historical record, we see that the people were wiped out. Not the buildings, not the structures, but the people died. And the laments talk about a cloud of death that swept over the area, killed everybody. Mothers were weeping, fathers were crying, but the buildings survived. Some kind of disaster that was in the story created by the gods, very close to what we would think maybe of some kind of radiation poisoning where people die but the buildings survive. Now we're talking about the time frame of these civilization and where these tablets come from, these other information. Now, I want you to remember this 3600. That's an important number in Sumerian mathematics. This is a timeline from a Malta museum. In Malta, they believe they have the oldest temples on earth. They call them, well, they believe that they're 3,600 years BC, and they show evidence of being swept over from a flood. So they date the flood to right before 3,600 BC. This is the pyramids. So Malta is saying their stuff is 1,000 years earlier than the pyramids. Okay, and here's Stonehenge. And here's Athens, Greece, and the Great Wall. And here's Rome and Colosseum. So we are now down here. The time of Jesus was here. The time of Abraham is here. And the Sumerians are up here. 2,000 years before Abraham 4,000 years before Jesus and 6,000 years before us. So our civilization of Western culture had a root that was around for a couple thousand years. Now we're going to see some of the information left behind. Okay, this is kind of blurry. It's probably not possible to get it clear. This shows a library. This is in a museum in Turkey that my mother-in-law actually took on a trip with Zechariah. And we don't actually know if every one of these tablets is translated correct all the way through, but this is how they store them. They're simply clay or stone tablets on a library shelf, and some archaeologists found libraries like this. This is what's the most interesting about this type of data. It hasn't been changed since the scribe wrote it. You can't say that he didn't say what he said. What he scribbled 6,000 years ago to 4,000 years ago is still there. It's not like writing on parchment, where you can say thou shalt not. Hey, let's make that thou shalt. That sounds great. That's not like this. We know exactly what the original said. And who believes that this piece of paper, my notes, is going to be around for 2,000 years? But if nobody blows this up, this will survive. And if nobody breaks it off, it will still be there. Now this is the method of how they were able to translate the old tablets, and a progression of pictographic writing and how it became the later on cuneiform script. First we start with the oldest form of Sumerian pictographic writing. The first one is earth, ki. That's the root of the word gi, or Gaia, for Mother Earth, ki and gi. Notice the earth is not round. The earth is an oval, egg-shaped. That's pretty funny because the earth actually does look more like that than round. Here's the symbol for mountain, which is Kur in Sumerian. In Hebrew, Kur, or mountain, is Har. Kur becomes Har. It's very similar. And then we go down to the symbol for man, Lu. Well, Lu is still a man's name today. And the word Lulu means somebody mixed up. Actually, the Sumerians created that too. They called us Lulu Amelo, mixed up beings. So Lulu, to describe somebody a little bit mixed up and crazy, it's been around a long time. And of course, you get your other usual stuff. So you see, we start with a pure picture, and then the scribe decided, it's easier to turn the picture sideways for some reason. And then from sideways, it became more of a cuneiform until it became letters and words, as opposed to pictures. And so there's a progression. So we know, when we find a tablet that's this, we know it's older than this. We don't have to guess. We can see the progression of how it comes about. And that's how they were able to translate from ancient Persian to Assyrian to Babylonian to Akkadian to Sumerian. And here's the timeline of language on Earth in the western part of the world, from the Middle East to Europe to America. Sumerio-Akkadian is the first full language that we find the evidence of writing in the tablets for. Egyptian is actually after that, and there's a lot of influence in Egyptian from Sumerian and Akkadian. We have a whole bunch of stuff that comes on the side here. Phoenician, Greek, Latin is over here, off of Phoenician. Phoenician is also going into Hebrew. Now here's the Bible writers over here. Here's what's happening. You have Phoenician, the names of the letters, and the sounds of the letters, and the shapes of the letters of ancient Hebrew is Phoenician. When they look at, let's say, stuff that they think is from King David era, or a little bit older, it's actually Phoenician lettering. And the names of the letters are still the same. And the word sounds are Phoenicians because it came directly from this Akkadian root, all the way up here. Later on, Aramaic became the common language. That's the language that Jesus spoke. And the letters changed. The shape of the letters changed, but Hebrew was still being spoken. But now it's being written in a different form. Any language on earth could be written with anybody's character set. Every language's character set has the sounds that we make with our mouth. So it's not a difficult thing. You just have to figure out how to use those sounds and what the words mean. So Hebrew has a double influence that comes into it here and then later on over here. And that's very significant for the kind of knowledge that passes through over the years. Here's a few of the common sounds that appear through the history. For example, now I know that I have a 2-year-old and 3-month baby girl, Rebecca, And when she started to make sounds, I was like, oh my God. I talked to my wife. I said, my baby's speaking Sumerian. She can say amma, mama, amma. That's mother in Sumerian. And she says ba, 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 da, da, da. And that's dada, or daddy, in Sumerian. In Hebrew, ima is mother. So amma becomes ima. Ba, 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 or adada becomes abba. So what happens is the language goes, in the old days, or older days, from more of the basic root sounds to a more structured type of way of saying it. We talked about kur and har. Kur in Sumerian, har is mountain in Hebrew. The word for great, here's an example of where some of the letters stay the same, but then one may change. Gal is great in Sumerian, the word gal. In Hebrew, gadol. So it still has the G and the L in the beginning and the end, but the middle sound has changed. There's a god in Sumerian called Dumuzi. Later on, he becomes Tammuz. Da becomes Ta. All you're seeing is very simple. The accents change through thousands of years of spoken language. We all use slang right now. Instead of we saying technology, we say tech. We shorten it. We don't say cellular, we say cell. That's how languages progress. So we can go back and see the long form of what's being spoken and where it came from and what the original meaning would be, because we may have some pictures of some of those words. We don't have to rely simply on what the text is translated as. When somebody says Eden, the Garden of Eden, you're speaking Sumerian. The word E in Sumerian is house, and din is the word righteous or justice. In Hebrew, a courthouse is Beit Din, house of judgment or justice. They mujahadin, they're holy warriors. The din word still exists in the Semitic language, and the Sumerians started it. So the Eden is a house of judgment. It's possible that every major city-state had a place where the king, or the high priest, or the god passed judgment on issues of solving disagreements between people, and had an Eden, a house where justice was dealt out. The word for the sun, in Sumerian, Utu is the sun, and there was a god named Utu. In Akkadian, Utu became Shamash. In Hebrew, the word for sun is Shemesh. So you have god names that become the words of celestial objects. And you have a lot of this play going through history, and it makes it easy in some ways to find the roots of meanings of words. This is just a picture of the table of contents from a book by Samuel Noah Kramer, and I recommend anybody who wants to read more about what the Sumerians had to say and what knowledge they had. Samuel Noah Kramer was the preeminent Sumerologist of last century. Here's some of the things he found the first of in these texts. The first schools. The first Congress, two-party Congress. A king petitioning to his parliament or his Congress to go to war. The king was not allowed in this story to go to war on his own. He had to get approval. The first reforms, tax reduction. Law codes, the first cases of crime and punishment type situations. If you kill an ox, your punishment is how many pieces of coin or money. The first legal precedents, medicine, agriculture, horticulture. Philosophy, the first cosmogony and cosmology, meaning the first stories of how humans came to be and also how the solar system came to be. They discussed it first. Ethics, the first moral ideals. The first Job, a character whose God makes life a little difficult for him and tests his religiousness. Wisdom, the first proverbs and sayings. One Sumerian saying is, man, for his pleasure, marriage. On thinking it over, divorce. And there's lots of them, and they're funny. And then for the purposes of our discussion and how it affects our civilization, the first biblical parallels, a story that seems to be the same as what the Bible talks about. The first Noah, or flood story. First tales of resurrection. Literature, man's first heroic age, the first library catalogs. In other words, sometimes archaeologists broke into a library of a king and they found a shelf of tablets, and the first tablet had on it a list of what's on this shelf. So they were able to compare, hey, this is missing, and this we have, and now we know. And so they were able to categorize very easily in comparison to just finding something that's not categorized. It made it a lot easier. Some of the kings boasted, Ashurbanipal, that he was able to speak the language from before the flood. He wrote this on the tablets. The tablets usually had the signature of the scribe on the bottom. And so, first of all, the scribe was a very honored profession, because back then, if the king wanted to get his word out, you had to have a scribe write down what the king said, and then you had to repeat that edict or rule by the king to everybody in the empire. So the scribe was essential for communication and keeping a civilization together. The first destruction, deliverance, the first messiahs, the ideal king that comes to save you from all that's ill. And of course, I mean, just some basic stuff, and he's got the first lullaby. The first case of a woman singing to her baby to get her to sleep. It's very, very fun to go through this stuff. Okay, here's the first real tablet we're seeing pictures of close up. This is a mathematical tablet. For those of you who travel, this is in the British Museum. It's on the permanent display there, so it should always be out. I don't know if you know this. Most museums only put out 10 to 20% of what they actually have. And so if you don't visit them regularly, you can probably miss a lot of exhibitions. This mathematical tablet, which has shapes that look like this, is for measuring areas of land to figure out if a father dies, how do you divide it up to the sons? If you sell a piece out, how do you divide it out? And it has instructions for that. Now here's that number 3600 again. We talked about that. They had a symbol that represented this specific number. And here's some of their other ways of keeping mathematical symbols and drawings. And so it wasn't that hard for these archaeologists and historians to figure it out after they learned the trick. Remember, when you're drawing on a two-dimensional surface, you can't repeat over. You have to have clear lines that are easy to see. So there is not an infinite amount of choices. There is a finite amount of things that you can draw and make lines with. Especially since you're not making a gigantic picture, you're trying to communicate. So it's intentionally made so that you can understand it. And here's the mathematical system that the Sumerians used. It's very unusual. They had a way of doing 6 times 10 times 6 times 10. Now let me just show you how this works out in a way that you're familiar with. 6 times 10 is 60. 60 times 6 is 360. They came up with the 360-degree circle. And then when you took that 360 and you times it by 10, you got 3600, that number that I said is going to be important. But here's what's funny. What people don't realize is that this is what we use today. How many bagels or donuts do you buy when you go to the baker? A dozen. That's 2 times 6. How many months are in the calendar year? 12. 2 times 6. How many disciples of Jesus? How many tribes of Israel? How many inches in a foot? How many hours in a day? 24 we use now. That's 4 times 6. But originally they were called double hours. There was 12 double hours, and they were longer, and then it got changed later. We still use this system today. Who here can tell me how to tell the baker that they want a group of 10 bagels or donuts? I have 10 fingers and 10 toes. Does anybody know how to say a group of 10? The baker won't know it if you said it. It's a deca. Tell him you want a deca of donuts. He's never heard it before. Yet we don't use that. We're using their system of sexagesimal. Even today, in our calendar, in our timekeeping, in our measuring. And their system had this sexagesimal using 60s and 12s made calculations of greater numbers much, much easier. They had a lot less fractions to deal with, and they were able to deal with gigantic numbers. And the numbers are so gigantic that they even represent numbers that the ancients should not have known about. Precession. Precession is when the Earth's axis wobbles in a cycle of 25,920 years. So the Earth's axis is not perfect. What precession causes is the zodiacal changes, in meaning, we are now in the age of Aquarius. Every zodiacal age is 2160 years, and times 12 would give you 25,920. So the Sumerians had this information, which makes no sense for a civilization in 3,000 years BC. How can you track time over 2,000-year spans? Here's the age of Pisces we're in right now. We're going into the age of Aquarius. Hopefully it'll be a good age. The age of Aries, the ram here, 2220 BC to 60 BC. The age of Taurus. During the time of Egypt, you'll see a lot of bulls. Then all of a sudden it becomes rams. A lot of people think that when there's a sign of Jesus on somebody's car and it's a fish, it stands for fisherman. Not correct. It's actually the Pisces symbol. Because back then, these kind of things and events that happened had an astrological and astronomical type feel to them. So they were keeping time in an astronomical way. And they were calculating numbers that had to do with 12,960,000. All right. 4,000 BC? Who needs such numbers? Why calculate it? Why deal with it? I just want to grow my crops and eat. They calculate 12,960,000 down to the lowest part possible to get to the numbers that Hilbrecht, this guy here, realized had to do with the zodiac, had to do with precession. How did these people know? How did they figure out a mathematical system if they just suddenly arrived and suddenly came to be? How could they do this? Well, we're going to see that they didn't actually take credit for it themselves. And normally you would think of the king boasting, I'm victorious in battle, I've created a great mathematical system, I have the knowledge and this and that. They didn't do that. They attributed all that they know they learned from the Anunnaki, their gods. And Anunnaki means those who from heaven to earth came. They didn't take credit for themselves. And here they are calculating numbers they're not supposed to have known. Now, no one on earth is supposed to know this number till the Greeks come to pass and sort of get close to it. And then to confirm the number happens much later, a few hundred years ago, to make the exact calculation. Yet it appears on planet Earth in a time frame where it should not exist. This tablet and the description of this tablet is out of time from what we've been told about our historical record and the story of our planet. Here's the names of the zodiac that the Sumerians created, along with the animals that they also chose to represent each cycle. Guana, the heavenly bull, that's Taurus. Mashtaba, twins, the Gemini. Here's Ab-Sin, whose father was Sin, that's the maiden Virgo. Dove, pincers, the crab. Every single zodiac, animal, and name comes from them. And it's still being used today. A lot of people follow astrology very closely. And it's amazing to see that even though this is found in historical record, no one's talking about this. If you go to a university class, they'll tell you that the mathematical system comes from the Babylonians. But the Babylonians didn't create it. They inherited it from the Akkadians and from the Sumerians. And we know that because when they found the tablets, they also found the oldest versions of the tablets, which led into the most recent ones. I don't know why the textbooks still say the Babylonians. This is our first cylinder seal that we're looking at, and I'll tell you a little bit how to look at these seals. First of all, this is the impression rolled into clay, and this is some cuneiform script. This is always, or usually going to represent the owner of the seal. These were used like stamps, so that your name was on it, and you chose like a motif of a historical story, a religious thing, something like that, to make it colorful and impressive. They created these seals as a negative onto a jewel which was hardened, and then they rolled it on clay or stone or something that they can impress upon, clay. And no one really knows how they created them because they were created as negatives. But they always have interesting information in them. First, we see 4 humans here drinking beer from straw. Yeah, the Sumerians created beer. They actually recorded over 200 different recipes for beer. They loved beer. Now, first of all, we know this is the Earth and the Moon. This is a star, but it's 8-pointed, so we think it represents Venus. And the number 8, I'll explain later why 8 would be Venus. Here's Mars, here's Jupiter. Oh my, what is this? Saturn. With rings? Hello, you can't see Saturn with rings unless you have binoculars at least of 10 or 15 power. There's no other ancient depiction I can find anywhere that has rings other than this. This is a very unique piece on this planet. And this is also unusual. The straw is in between Mars and Jupiter. Now, what's in between Mars and Jupiter? Well, it's the asteroid belt. Are they saying that this is the asteroid belt? No. But it is consistent with where the asteroid belt really is, isn't it? See, a lot of what we're going to see tonight, is it consistent with what we're familiar with? Is it consistent with what we know? Or is it opposite with what we know? I wouldn't talk about the straw if it was over here. I wouldn't talk about it if it was over here. But it happens to be consistently in the place where the asteroid belt really is. And I think that's interesting, because it is showing Saturn with rings. Maybe it is talking about the asteroid belt. We don't know. There's nothing else on here to indicate that they are trying to make more of, give you more information than just a simple, like, this is our local neighborhood. Here's another religious, astrological, astronomical type of seal. First of all, this is now we're seeing gods. How do we know they're gods? They're on animals. They also have usually funny hats. Okay? Why are they on animals? To show that they're lofty. They're higher than humans. They're lifted above. Notice they look pretty normal. They look humanoid. They're not shown as anything other than humanoid. We have more stuff in the sky here. Here's a winged disc. Very popular motif. 7 dots. Another looks like eight-pointed star and a crescent moon. Again, then we have this object, this conical-shaped object that's in the middle on this thing. And then we have this lady here with this kind of claw that we think is a medical device that's shown in other pictures being used for either births to cut umbilical cords and things like that. This 7 dots throughout archaeology for several hundred years has been thought to be the Pleiades, the 7 sisters. Zechariah is the first researcher to say the 7 actually represents Earth, which makes no sense, but we'll see later on a tablet why 7 possibly could be Earth. It's very different than any other historian archaeologist is saying. Most people who would come here who don't believe that would say that that's the Pleiades, but we know it's going to be Earth, and we're going to see why. Also, we're going to see that somehow this shape becomes a common motif in ancient depictions. This is the victory stela of Naram Sin. It is pretty old. 2300 BC, he was a king in Acadia. We have them going to war against this object, being afraid of this object, conquering this object, praying to this object. This god guy has horns on his hat. We will see that horns usually depicts one of the gods. We have some astronomical things up here with multiple rays coming out. Usually if it's 12, it represents a certain god named Anu. The different numbers of petals or leaves coming out will determine which god they're trying to revere or pay homage to in the picture. But once again, we see this shape becoming extremely important in this culture. And here is an example of a king or god taking credit at least for a victory in battle. This is a... Oh, and by the way, that covers part of what's called the Wars of Gods and Men. Because this guy, who's probably a god, is leading the war, as a general would. He's there up front leading the humans. This is a drawing of pieces that are in the British Museum once again. They have full-size wall reliefs. They're 6 to 7 feet tall. They have a hallway that has both walls covered. And on this wall is Assyrian depictions of battle and different things. But in the text that describes the battle, the god was helping them to win the war. And the god used special devices or weapons called missiles, but it doesn't say missiles. We translate it as missiles because they're showing these things. Now, they're depicting shields and swords and arrows in this and all other depictions. They have accurate pictures of every aspect of war, but they also have these missile-looking objects that are flying around and described as the weapon the god used to help them. And again, a story where the god was physically involved in the war that the humans were fighting. Not just as a fantasy, but in their case, accrediting the god with winning that battle. There's a story of Alexander the Great as well, of a ray of light that came off of a shield in the sky and knocked a wall down and let Alexander the Great's army go through a certain city. It's common to see those stories of the gods involved in ancient wars that the humans fought. But when you see a recreation in a movie like the story of Troy, Helen of Troy, gods were involved in that whole mess as well in the actual Greek mythology. But they never show you that in the movie. But that's what the true story says, or the original story. Here's more pictures of these kind of cone objects, again with stars around them to show that we're talking about something that has to do with sky. Look here, more star symbols, and this little guy inside this little chamber. Zechariah calls this a radiating chamber. And then we have this, who knows what that is, something that's flying in the sky. It's a side view, it could be just a scratch. Now these could be nothing, or they can be consistent with what we've already seen. Reverence to this type of shape. connecting this type of shape with their gods, connecting it with stars, and them simply recording what they saw in front of them. Simple and easy to translate the information, to send it through the thousands of years. They simply drew what they saw. This is in Egypt. Tomb of Hoi on the wall. It's an incredible piece here, and this is, of course, the drawing of it. The first, you'll notice there's something above here, and there's something below. Above is people facing away from the center-coned object. Once again, it's the centerpiece of the drawing. They are praying and not facing it, because it's godly, because it represents their gods, and don't face it directly. Face away, pray away, and there's even giraffes facing away, and giraffes are kind of rare to be seen in old depictions as well. Now, from what we're familiar with from technology, and I grew up, looking at the Apollo program and what NASA's done, and they used the technology of heat shields to come back and have their, capsules come down and absorb the heat and not burn up. And what you would see if the heat shield was used would be scratches and chips, and it's just like here. It's not a perfectly drawn shield. It has straps here that are clamping this on in case you have to get rid of it for some reason. You want to get rid of it. So it looks like technology here with like an understanding that they simply saw something that had been used. It's not perfect. It's not pristine. They're not showing this object that has no flaws. That would be godlike. They're showing a reality-based picture. They're simply drawing what they saw. Down here we have things that look like gears. Here we have these shower-looking things. And here we have guys holding hoses. These guys are doing maintenance. You're seeing technology. You're seeing work to clean up or repair or refuel whatever's going on here. And then we have these things here that look like exhaust ports. Now, I've seen a picture from an underground silo from a Titan missile. And exhaust is used in a modern way the same way this picture depicts. The exhaust has to be exported to the side. This could be heat or filters on the side here. And what's beautiful is that you can go to Egypt, you can go to the Tomb of Hoi, you can see it for yourself. Don't trust this drawing. Go see it with your own eyes. Take your pictures from every angle. Do the research on your own. Decide for yourself if it's showing a rocket, if it's showing technology, if it's showing something real. But at least you'll know where to go now to see it. I'll tell you, this is the kind of thing that excites me. I can't wait to get back to Egypt. There's a lot of stuff to see. And you have a lot of these things. You see these in Egypt as well. Little characters, godlike beings, inside of these capsule-looking objects looking out of the window. Very common. These were put on top of pyramids and other memorials, and it's usually the top stone, the capstone. But it's just something that pops up all the time. Again, is it consistent with what we know? Or is it completely off the wall and it has nothing to do with anything we're familiar with? Another reference to this cone-shaped object, Phoenician cone, showing this object seated on a platform surrounded by a wall and a giant temple surrounding this. Now, we think that this location they're talking about is Baalbek, Lebanon, and we're going to see some pictures from Baalbek. And the Romans built the biggest temple in the empire on the Baalbek site, the Temple of Jupiter. Bigger than anything that was even in Italy, was done on this site. And it was wholly, this site, and when you see it, you'll be, I hope, amazed. The Baalbek site existed before any record of anything existed. It's always been there. And again, that same object. This is a funny piece. Zechariah talks about this piece in the Earth Chronicles expeditions. This was a piece found in Turkey that the museum director thought was a fake, even though it was found 16 feet below the mud. So it was a fake that was done thousands of years ago. Because they were digging for archaeological records and tablets and stuff that they found in the area along with this. This is the drawing of this little thing. There's a little guy in here with his knees up. His head is kind of broken, like chipped off. It has these little three things in the back. Zechariah shows this with the little space shuttle thing, but it looks like a one-man sort of escape pod or one-man shuttle. Zechariah went to the director of the museum, asked for this piece. He denied it was there. He went to lunch. Zechariah sat for 2 to 3 hours, never left. The museum guy took it out of his drawer that was behind his desk. He said, "Why don't you display it?" The director says, "Well, it's a fake." "How do you know it's a fake?" "Well, we don't have anything else like it anywhere. It's an original piece. We as a museum cannot show an original piece." Zechariah was astonished. He said, "What if I can prove to you that there's other things like this? Will you display it?" And he said, "Well, okay, I'll do it." So Zechariah went home and sent him pictures from all over the world of rocket ship type little objects. And they now displayed on the museum. No one's been there in a couple years. They display the museum with the little note on the bottom that says, "We think it's a fake." I mean, it's just incredible. Here's a piece that they could, you want to increase revenue to your museum? Advertise in UFO magazines and other places around the world that you have evidence, and people will come to see it. But instead, status quo, we don't want to rock the boat, we can't deviate from other museums, they'll think of us, who knows. I hope it's still there. We have a lot of people did go to see it after Zechariah first wrote about it and confirmed it. That was there back then. Now we come to a very impressive cylinder seal. This is in East Berlin. It's cylinder seal VA243. And what is showing in the seal is very interesting. First again, we have the name of the owner of the seal. We have the god, and we know that this is Enki from the text. And God is seated on this chair. And notice he's as tall as these humans, but he's also seated. He has a horned hat. So we know he's a god. This is a god, and there's a human. What are they doing? You see the guy's arms? He's giving. He's giving to mankind the plow. This culture didn't say that they invented the plow. The king did not take credit for it. Their stories said the gods gave them the plow. And here's the picture that backs up what the texts are talking about. So we have the same story in two forms, visual form and a textual form. Once again, their god is shown as a humanoid-looking character with eyes and a nose and a beard. But he's extremely tall. If he was to stand up, he would be a little bit gigantic. Now, are we really to believe that humans did not create the plow and some aliens gave us knowledge of how to farm? Well, here's where the evidence gets interesting, because this piece of information here is well beyond, again, 4,500 years ago. It should not exist. Nobody should know or have this information or be able to depict this. First of all, what is in the center? A star, the sun, our sun. Do you all remember when you were children how you used to draw the sun? Because I drew it like this, with rays coming off of it. And by the way, there's a lot of depictions of suns with rays coming off, or stars with rays coming off, or planets with stuff coming off. So that's not an unusual. Also, it happens to be the Star of David, six-pointed star. If you take away the globe, it's just like this. A triangle here, a triangle there. It's one of the oldest depictions of the Star of David that I can find. Now, I know from, of course, studying this piece, that this shows every planet that we know of in our solar system today, and I'll show you how it is set up. The reason it shows, and there's also 12 objects here, we'll talk about 12 for a second. 12 objects because every god was represented by an astrological symbol or object. So they counted the sun. There was the god who was the sun god. They had a moon god. So the sun and the moon, the 9 planets is 11, and they talked about an extra planet, which Steve mentioned was called Nibiru, the planet of crossing. Here is the Earth and the moon. Now, it's not going in order, so don't think that they're trying to tell you how the solar system is really aligned. The important thing is that whoever the scribe got the information from to draw this picture told him what to do and how many to put. This is the Earth and the moon. This is Mercury and Venus. This is Uranus, Neptune, and this is Pluto. This is Mars. This is this extra planet Nibiru. This is Jupiter and Saturn. So across the top, here and here. So we have every object identified that we know of today. And Pluto was not discovered till the 1930s. Uranus and Neptune were the 1800s. Yet here is all of them depicted. Over here is now the asteroid belt. So if we were to draw this, we would show little pieces of rocks broken up here. What's interesting is they show a planet over here. Now, are they saying that the asteroid belt used to be a planet and now we look at it and it's not, the planet was destroyed? Probably not, because this piece is only 4,500 years old. The asteroid belt is obviously millions of years old. Based on the trajectory of individual asteroids, if it was less, we would see more of them flying off, but they're pretty consistently staying in their orbit. So we think what they're telling us is that when that planet of theirs, that their gods told them they came from, is close to Earth, it shows up between Jupiter and Mars. So maybe the asteroid belt is a leftover pieces of something that was hit in that place where this planet would come by. But again, this knowledge of a sun-centered solar system should not exist, well, before Copernicus. Although there was a Greek astronomer and mathematician who also calculated the Earth was not in the center and the sun was, but of course they didn't go with his theory. They went with the theory of what you can observe, that it seems that the Earth is still and everything moves around us. Nobody in school, was anybody here taught in school that the ancients knew the sun was in the center? Okay, good, because I wasn't either. So this piece should not exist. You should not have any diagram anywhere in the ancient world that shows the sun in the center. It's one of the best pieces on planet Earth that there was advanced knowledge given to primitive humans. Now, I'm not saying that everyone in society knew this information. What's interesting about the ancient world is that the religious information was astronomical information. The cycles of the moon, the orbits of the planets, that was the knowledge that they were keeping. That was the special priest knowledge and the religious knowledge. It wasn't of what we think of today. This is the information that the gods gave them, and that's what they prized above everything. To keep a record of that, they depicted it and drew it, so that for further civilizations and people would remember it. This is, they call the planisphere. This is, again, a piece that's in the British Museum on their permanent collection. It's always going to be on display. Well, first of all, we see that it's obviously clay, yet it's been smoothed out here and melted here. So some weird stuff is going on in this. Let's talk about some things and pieces of information that are on here. And by the way, this I consider the most important piece on planet Earth, because it tells a story. First, you have this little shape here, which looks like an ellipse. It should not exist, again, because the ancients were not supposed to have known about the shape of the true planets that path around the sun. It's not a circle. It's a double foci here. 2 points of rotation around. We have a thing here that looks like a constellation with an arrow pointing here. Here we have 3 intersecting lines with an arrow pointing here. And here we have a triangle with an arrow pointing here. Now we're going to look at a drawing of this thing so we can get some more detail. Here's the ellipse. Here's the constellation, it looks like Orion to me, pointing here. Here's the 3 intersecting lines coming here. Now, to navigate in a three-dimensional space, you need 7 coordinates. This is how it works. You need an originating point or a destination point, that's 1. So let's say I'm starting from here and I'm going there. How do I get there in space? You have to connect 6 points. 2 stars, 2 stars, 2 stars, and you draw lines. 3 intersecting lines from 6 coordinate points, and now you know where you're going, or where you came from. This is a tablet that's of course written on a 2-dimensional surface, which shows 3 intersecting lines and an originating point over here. This shows the ability to navigate in 3 dimensions. It's not supposed to exist. This cannot be if we've been told the correct story of the order of our history. But obviously it does exist, and that's why I recommend everyone go see it for themselves, with your own eyes. Here we have the story that we're going to translate, this piece of the pie here. We think this is saying that they came from a mountainous planet, this direction, and they made a course correction between Dilgon and Apin. They came here. This is the sky above Earth. It was called the Way of Enlil. Here is the sun, and then there's 3 planets, Mercury, Venus, Earth. So here they're showing that this is the 3rd planet from the sun. But what did they say over here? The deity Enlil, the god Enlil, went by the planets. And how many planets did he go by? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Wait a second. 7. Pluto, Uranus, Neptune, Saturn, Jupiter, Mars, Earth. That's where Zechariah figured out why they called Earth the seventh planet. Because they came from the outside of our solar system and came inward. If you're born on planet Earth, we are the third rock from the sun. If you come from outside the solar system, we are the seventh planet of orbit that you pass by. A NASA scientist tells Zechariah at a seminar that this was the piece that convinced him that Zechariah was correct. Because Earth could never be called the seventh in any stretch of the imagination to anybody who's been here and lived here. This word kabab is, in Hebrew, the root of the word kochav. So kakab became kochav, star in Hebrew. But in Sumerian, kakab means, well, that's the argument. To me, it means astronomical object. It doesn't mean necessarily star. It could be planet, it could be star, it could be asteroid. And there's a disagreement with the archaeologists when they're studying the Nibiru, because it's called Kakab Nibiru. So they think that, oh, maybe that's the name of the Milky Way galaxy, maybe it's a constellation. And there's a slight mistranslation with the word Kakab. Dilgun thinks it was Jupiter, Zechariah thinks it's Jupiter and Mars, so he thinks this is a course correction in the asteroid belt. They had to navigate through the asteroid belt before they got to Earth. Again, this is why I think it's one of the most important pieces on Earth, because it also details the fact that there was knowledge of planets that we didn't discover till 100 years ago or so. Okay. All right, come on, am I crazy? I'm sure some people think so. Are we really talking that they knew about rockets, fuel-based technology? This is man's greatest creation in space from a takeoff point of view, the space shuttle. Flame, fire, smoke, heat. If everyone's seen a launch, all the animals run. The sound is supposedly one of the loudest ever created by humans. What's interesting is this. The Sumerians didn't just leave behind pictures. They left behind textual descriptions. Gilgamesh is the oldest literary tale that we have a complete record for. 16 tablets long, the whole story. Gilgamesh is searching for immortality. The date of Gilgamesh is 3500 BC for the completed works. Gilgamesh was the king of Uruk, in Hebrew, Erech. Ah, it should be the root of my name there. Okay, and Gilgamesh was, he thought he deserved immortality because he was two-thirds divine. Because his mother was a Anunnaki female, or a goddess. His father was the priest and the king of Uruk. So that indicated to us that two-thirds divine meant that more of the DNA of the mother is used, and so you could become, it's a predominance of you, you're making it by your mother. Jewish people, they go by the mother if the person is Jewish. And that comes from the Sumerian way of looking at things. Also, Gilgamesh was the first to be claimed as a hybrid being. His father was a god, his mother was a goddess, and his father was a human. He's the oldest, but he's not the only one. It's a common theme throughout history. All of the pharaohs of Egypt had to be sanctioned to be from the seed of a god to be able to rule. You could not rule without the god connection. Gilgamesh is on his journey for immortality. He's traveling with a friend, Enkidu. He thinks he's having a dream, his third dream. His limbs are paralyzed. The heavens cried out, earth roared. Daylight vanished and darkness issued forth. Lightning flashed, fire broke out. Clouds swelled, it rained death. And the glow disappeared, the fire went out, and all that had fallen turned to ashes. Does that match what you would think that you would see if you saw the shuttle being launched if you were nearby? Is any of his description not consistent with a rocket launch? Is there any part of this that is in disagreement with what you would describe when you saw a rocket launch? Daylight, darkness, fire, flash, smoke, and ash. That's the beauty of this kind of data. You may have a picture of a rocket ship, and you don't know if you can believe your eyes. Then all of a sudden the text surprises you and you find a description that matches the same event. Textual evidence is the recorded history, and visual evidence is the recorded history in a visual form. So you can put them together. Now you could think that this is fantasy and this is really a dream. But once again, you still have to answer the questions, how about that advanced knowledge they had? precession, mathematics, the planets of the solar system, and more stuff. This is me on Malta. I think it's next to Gigantea, the biggest temple on Malta. And this is also the biggest cut stone on Malta. Okay, why do humans have to work with giant stones? Why not just use these little stones over here? They're so easy to move around. What is the point? Who thinks that this is a big stone? You do? Okay, great. Thank you. Somebody does. It is a big stone. I felt pretty small next to it. But it's not the biggest stone on earth. Because this is child's play for people who use giant stones and move them around like we do a deck of cards. This is the biggest cut stone on earth. 35 people are standing in front of a single stone that is cut and sticking out of the quarry even today. This is the area of Baalbek, Lebanon. This is the area where that little coin showed that object sitting on the platform. And this is 1.5 miles away from where 3 of these stones are actually in place on the plateau of this platform. Now, if you're a giant and you get 10 of your buddies around together, can you lift this stone? It's over 1,100 tons. We cannot lift it today except straight up and straight down. We cannot move the stone today with our technology. And yet this is 1.5 miles away from where 3 of them are in place already. But they're not in place at the bottom where the small stones are. They're not in place in the middle where the medium stones are. They are at the top. From 1.5 miles away quarry. Who needs to work with such stones? What is the purpose of using gigantic stones? It just makes your life more difficult. And the construction even more difficult. But what's the purpose of it? What do you need it for? If you're launching a rocket and you have fire and smoke and exhaust coming out, you have to absorb it somehow. And you know what? This is a perfect natural way to do that. You don't go to Earth and bring your... You go to Earth and you find what you need on the planet and you use the resources. You take your tools and you build what you need. And Baalbek is a giant stone platform. And you know what? Stone is made from extremely high temperature. So it could absorb exhaust from a rocket and protect the civilization that's around that. Most ancient temples are sort of round with an opening in the middle so that something could land in them and not be seen once it's landed. And also to protect the people from smoke and debris and other things. When the Temple of Solomon, the first holy temple that is in the Bible, that the God of the Bible was instructed Solomon to build, when they finally initiated the temple, God of the Bible appeared and went to this temple. But the cloud and smoke from the God arriving chased everyone out of the temple. They couldn't stay in it while that, whatever that was that the God was traveling in, came in. They had to run away. This is something that nobody can visit anymore for the moment. It's in Baalbek, Lebanon, where Hezbollah probably has a training camp still. There was a small opportunity when there was peace in the 90s for a while, and Zechariah took a tour group and went there. Now there's houses that are right here, so you can't get a clear, wide picture of this thing. They basically have built, civilization is built up to the edge of this temple. But it's an incredible sight. And then if there's ever a chance to get to Baalbek, Lebanon, please go, if it's possible. Okay. These are some of the oldest figures that we see in around the year 3500 to 4000 BC. They're definitely very alien looking. These characters carried wands. They're called Ubakian or Ubakian figures. But they are also described in the text of what they were used for. They were used as, not like an android, but more like a medical servant. They were instrumental when Inanna was killed for 3 days. They came down and resurrected her after 3 days. They had with them knowledge that apparently a lot of knowledge stored in what devices were called the Me. The Me was a handheld, we think of it like a chip, where it had instructions and information on it. And there's a story of Inanna, we're going to see pictures of Inanna later, of stealing a handful of these chips, and they weren't able to do certain operations. And then she was followed all over Africa and different places before she gave up the chips. And that's also how she died in the story. These characters were sent down to fix her, to diagnose the issue, the problem, and to medically heal her. Some people think they look reptilian. I and Zechariah definitely do not believe in the reptilian theory of anything. There's a lot of depictions of demons and other kind of beings that are fantastical. But all the depictions of the gods are humanoid looking. All the descriptions of what they were doing had human behavior and traits. And these characters are described. And they're not any of the leading class or ruling class. They are simply programmable beings. Okay, now we're seeing a picture of Anu, the chief god of the Sumerian pantheon. He's being attended to by two humans here. They look young, so they are short, but he's really tall. He also has a lot of ridges on his hat. And this is a 12-pointed star, so his symbol, that's Nibiru, 12. So he's the top of the pantheon. And there's also a picture of him and his wife together. There was no problem with the feminine or them depicting females. They had goddesses. It was some of their most popular gods were females or goddesses. Again, if he stood up, he would be really tall. This is in the museum, Syria Museum. Syria and Turkey have a lot of great information and stuff to see. And this is like about 6 feet tall. Inanna, the first bikini model in history. She was sexy. She was a seductress. This is an old piece as well. Inanna was talked about as, first of all, she was the granddaughter of the Anu, the character we just saw before. She was talked about as having a boat of heaven. She put on a full outfit of 7 different things that were described. She was the prototype of, her name was Inanna and Ishtar. Inanna is the root name of the name Ina, which is a popular Russian name, and Anna, or Anne. So that name has existed since the beginning, or those several names. Here is a life-size, 6-foot-tall statue of her, also in a Syrian museum in Aleppo. I'm sorry, in Mari. It's the Aleppo Museum in Mari in Syria. This is the front of her. Now, she's a princess, and she's supposed to be wearing a very elaborate headgear, but it's not very pretty. It really has very big shoulder pads, and has this horn thing here, and it's not really attractive, and she's holding this thing here. And let's see the back of her. Okay, it's not as clear, but the helmet here is very thick in back. We have a replica picture. This is from what you could buy if you go to their museum. It's a replica, like a souvenir. So it has this tube-like thing that we think is an air or breathing tube. Technology again. Here's the back of this helmet thing. Again, shoulder pads very thick, not very attractive, not a good headdress for a princess. Let's go back for a second to see the original and see if this makes sense. Now, if you were to see this and think about what I've just said without knowing how she was described, it wouldn't make sense. But she was not only described as a flyer, she was depicted. In this thing here, we are going to see a drawing of what we think it looks like. We think it's showing similar to like a World War I pilot's type outfit. Goggles, little symbols that have to do with flying or flags or whatever, and things like this. Now let's go back to the original. Here's these symbols like this, these colorful things. Here's these things sticking out. And by the way, this is a cylinder seal. This is a jewel that you could press into clay and it would make an image. Now, is she always depicted as a flyer like this? No. Because the motifs, she's very sexy. She has wings. She's trying to tempt you. She did a lot of tempting in the stories. But again, showing wings to denote flight. Not flight by magic, where you can just lift up and levitate. None of the gods were ever described to act that way. Every single description of flight had a vehicle or a vessel as part of the story. A boat of heaven. a divine bird, a shield of fire, and many other descriptions that are ancient in words because they didn't know what to say. The prototype of angels having wings is from this Mesopotamian motif of showing wings to denote flight. Here is the god Teshub, also named as Adad, the storm god. He's the prototype of the character Poseidon, the Greek ocean god, who carried a trident, also Neptune in the Roman pantheon. He's shown on a bull. This is again a full-size, 6-7 feet tall statue. They left behind incredible pieces to study. What's important is this. This character who was a storm god has the same description that you see in Greece. And then his motif of the trident appears in South America. Where? On the side of a mountain in Nazca, Peru. This is the hill. Nazca is a plateau, and if you are not familiar with Nazca, Peru, they are gigantic drawings on the ground that can only be seen from the air of animals, monkeys, birds, and other things, but you can't see them unless you're coming in at 1,500 feet. On the ground, it just looks like a scratch in the surface. Yet approaching this area is a trident of gigantic size. It shows a connection between some of these characters and our world, so they didn't just stay around. And the site of Nazca is like the ancient people. Supposedly it's 1500 AD, but those people sort of inviting their gods to come back. It's like a landing zone. We're making animal pictures for you, and we're inviting you back, and this is where we want you to land. And a lot of them look like runway-like strips. Very, very geometric patterns. And here's the god Shamash, also known as Utu. What's funny is this is Hammurabi. Hammurabi is the first law code that is not Sumerian, but it is Akkadian. And he's receiving the law and its laws of crime and punishment, like, if you kill the ox and you pay this fine, or if, in this law code, some of the quotes appear later on in the Mosaic Law, the Moses Law, an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. Some of those sayings are in this law code. And here's a closer depiction of what he looked like. Once again, we have Hammurabi not taking credit for creating the law, not saying that he's a master genius of justice. He's attributing his God with giving him the information. And he's showing you a picture of it. He's not afraid to be seen subservient to this guy, thinking, postulating, contemplating, having a conversation, dealing in issues of crime and punishment, to have civilization act more efficiently. Later on, there's depictions with no God in the chair, in a different era. And they, in the story, say, well, the God left, and they were waiting for it to come back. But in that case, it didn't, or he didn't. So a lot of this Hammurabi law code ends up in the Mosaic Law, and that's another influence. Here's two black divine birds. This picture is from Tel Gasol in Israel. These little guys here were discovered by, believe it or not, the Vatican on an archaeological expedition they funded. Zechariah shows this in the book of the Earth Chronicles, and he shows in the book him looking at the original ones coming out of a drawer in the office of the archaeologists. Where is it found in Israel? It's the site where Elijah went up in a whirlwind. And that was witnessed by Elisha, his protege, his student. He's the one who saw the story. He's the one who saw him go up. And this is found in the exact site where they think this event occurred. Did they have anything to do with the whirlwind? It's hard to say. But it's definitely interesting. This is one of the oldest depictions of UFOs that I can find. I believe this is a cave painting in France, supposedly 10 or 12,000 years ago. Obviously, this is shown from the History Channel. Again, these little dots underneath are like this energy field that a lot of people see underneath the object, electromagnetism or the type of propulsion. If that's the case, this has always been with humans. This stuff has never not been around. There's never been a time in history where there weren't these objects, or there weren't gods, or there weren't depictions that show technology. You know, me growing up in Los Angeles in the 1970s, thinking that primitives were primitive, thinking that we were the epitome of creation and civilization, and, oh, we're going to the moon in 1969, 1970, how wonderful. Yet they've always been around if you knew where to look, if you were open to what you could see. Ah, they're watching you. These are the eye idols. Many of these found all over Sumerian and Mesopotamian areas. The characters that we're going to see in a minute were called the Watchers. Igigi in Sumerian. Igi is the to see, the verb to see. In Hebrew, iri, or ear, to see. So Igi becomes iri. Very similar sounding, but ga becomes ra over several thousand years of spoken slang and language being changed slightly here and there. In the Dead Sea Scrolls, the Watchers are the Iri. In the Sumerians, it's the Igigi. And that's how they were depicted. Pictographic writing from some of the oldest Sumerian language. Let me just give you that for a second here. Okay, we learned about this word din. It meant righteous. The word gear means flashy, lightning, or fiery object. This is a translation that I found in a recent Akkadian textbook from a university. And I sent the copy over to Zechariah, and he almost fell off the phone, basically, because the university is now teaching what Zechariah has taught for 30 years, that the word din gear means righteous or holy ones of this object-looking thing, which put together is what this word looked like. Ladies and gentlemen, what you are looking at is the first word in recorded history of Western civilization that means the word God. This is the first time the word God was used, and it didn't even mean God. God is the mistranslation, and we're going to see how. The word Dingir is righteous people of this flashy lightning object fiery thing, rocket ship. Later on, when the language is changed from Sumerian to Akkadian, Assyrian, the word Dingir changed to these three words, Ilu, Elani, Eluti, meaning lofty ones or gods. When you look at a translation of Sumerian document or text, what you see is this. They show you the Sumerian, and then you see the language written in English of how it sounds. Then you see the next language that's under it, usually Assyrian, Akkadian, or Babylonian. So it says in Sumerian, Dingir Enki, the god Enki. And then it says in this other language, the Ilu Enki, meaning the god Enki. So the time of the first translation after Sumerian, the mistranslation already occurred. The mistranslation of the word God occurred thousands of years before, and it has always been a mistranslation. There were two types of Dingir. The Anunnaki were like the ruling class, the upper level ones. Anu is heaven, Na, they came, to Ki, earth. Those who from heaven to earth came. Then the Igigi we mentioned, they're more like the orbital crew. They are the crew members. They don't have rank. There's going to be more non-ranked people or soldiers than there is going to be the top-level officers. Now here's where Hebrew comes in. After Assyrian and Babylonian and Akkadian already are through with changing the Dingir, meaning Hebrew picks it up the word God as El, Aloha, and Elohim. Now, there's a big argument whether Elohim is plural or not. It is plural. There's already two forms of the singular Elohim right here. El and Aloha are already part of Elohim. The third incarnation of this word is plural, and it's used plural many of the times. And then there's characters in the Bible that are called B'nai Ha-Elohim, children of the gods. So in the oldest written language, Dingir is the word for God, righteous or pure ones of that fiery object thing. And then Ilu, Alani, and Aluti becomes lofty ones. And then later on, God. That's how mistranslations can continue for thousands of years. Because until you go back to the original source, you wouldn't know. And you would have to look at the pictographic original to know what Dingir looked like. The creation of humans, shown in a pictorial form, visual form. This is the goddess Ninti, or Nintu. She's holding up the first man. And in the text it says, "My hands have made it, I have created it." Here's a like a tree of knowledge with 9, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 4, 9, the birth, what do you call it, the months of pregnancy. Here is her husband, Enki, the chief scientist, whose symbol was a symbol that looked like entwined DNA. The symbol that doctors use of a winged snake surrounding something was Enki's symbol. He's holding, I can't believe my own eyes, a test tube. 3,000 years BC, 4,000 years BC, this guy's got a test tube. And on the wall here on the shelf is flax of some kind of formulas or potions. And then there's a guy here who's mixing in this pot potions. In the text it's going to describe, we're going to see what they're mixing. So this is a visual form of what happened at the scene when humans were finally created. And now the textual description. Let man bear the load of the gods. Yeah, it's true. We were created to do work. The Bible says the same thing. We were created to work in the garden. The Sumerian story is we were created to do the work of the gods. Create a mortal that he may bear the yoke. Let him bear the yoke, the work of Elil. Let man bear the work of the law of the gods. Nintu, also Ninti, but Nintu in this translation, the way they read it here. Ninti shall mix clay with his flesh and his blood. Then a god and a man will be mixed together in clay. Humans, in their story, is a creation of 2 different species, a hybrid being. Will be mixed in clay. Let us hear the drumbeat forever after. Let a ghost come into the existence from the god's flesh. And let the ghost exist not to forget the slain god, the great Anunnaki who signs the fates. Nintu mixed clay with his flesh and blood. Does anybody think this story is familiar? This is the biblical story. But I'll show you how the Bible abbreviates it, so that you're not telling the story of multiple gods, but more of a single God doing the actions. First of all, let's talk about the word Adam. Adam in Hebrew is man, but blood is dam. Hebrew has word roots that make up the words, and many things form from them. The color red is Adam. Adam is man, dam is blood, and red is Adam. And Adamah is earth or clay, but it's actually red earth or clay. So, when the old story, and Atrahasis, by the way, is the name of one of those characters who was Noah, the flood character. Here, clay, Adamah. Blood, Dam. Man, Adam. Every one of the roots that Hebrew has is from here. That's why there's so many meanings for the same root. So they kept in Hebrew all of the different variations of the meaning, and it's formed the basis and understanding of how the language came to be, and we can see the original. Why then would all these individual meanings be in the same root? There's a little more here. Okay. This is from Zechariah's books. It's a good way to talk about it. First of all, the word for soul in Hebrew is nephesh. In Sumerian, nafishtu. Nafishtu is the old way of saying the same word. It's the long form. But nafishtu came from a Sumerian word, she'imti. She'imti literally means breath, wind, life. So when they say, the ghosts come to existence from the god's flesh, it's the same as saying, let the breath be pushed in. Okay. And let's see how the Bible words it. First, the quote, let us make man in our image and our likeness. It's a plural statement to an audience. And God formed the man of dust from the ground, which is Adamah, and he blew into his nostrils the soul of life, and man became a living being. Let a ghost come into existence from the flesh. That's the same way of saying that he blew into his nostrils the breath of life. And look here. In Hebrew, the nephesh word is from the root she'imti, and there's another word called neshama. Neshama is also soul or spirit. And nishmat is in the form of leda. So in Hebrew, nishmat is in past tense. Now watch this. Nishmat is shamata. So one word in Hebrew, nishmat, which is the soul, is the same sound as the Sumerian she'imti. And then you have the word nephesh, which is the same sound as nafishtu, which came from she'imti. And how do we know it came from that? Because they found translation texts that said this word in Sumerian is this word in Akkadian. And they had picture sets that said this word in Sumerian, this symbol became this word and this symbol in Akkadian. So that's what Hebrew does. Hebrew picks up on one side the sound of the original language that was spoken for thousands of years, and then in another way it picks up the meaning. And it divides it into two different forms. So one root of Hebrew for the word neshama, nishmat, comes from she'imti, the Sumerian original. And another form of nephesh comes from the Akkadian version of the same word. And then all the meanings of Adam and blood and red and all those are all part of the Hebrew meaning. So the connections become more strong. And this is also part of how it works. The word Anunnaki is those gods. The chief god was Enki. So think about these sounds. A-na-ka. Forget about the vowels. The language changes over thousands of years. But for those thousands of years at their festivals, from father to son, they are being taught what is our knowledge, what is our stories. And the Anunnaki, the A-na-ka, the Enki survives for years. And how does it survive in Hebrew? The word for giants is, lo and behold, Anaki. The word that went God in Sumerian is now the word for giant in Hebrew. Anak, Anaki, Anakim is plural. And by the way, Anaki is Enki. The first vowel is either N or An. What's the difference? It's the same thing. So in the Bible we have the giants, the children of Enki. Now that's the sound of the word. So Hebrew is picking up the sound of Anunnaki. What about the meaning of Anunnaki? Those who from heaven to earth came down. They use the word Nephilim from the Hebrew word nafal, fallen ones. This is the term where fallen angels came from. How do we know it's the fallen ones? How do we know they're not meaning giants from the Aramaic Nephila? Because they already have a word for giant here. And here they have the same meaning. In other words, Nephilim is those who fall down from above. The same that Anunnaki means, those who from heaven to earth came down. So Hebrew picks up the meaning and uses Nephilim, and Hebrew keeps the sound and makes it the word giants. And that's the play on word that Hebrew uses and where the original sources of those meanings come from. So when these stories enter the Bible, they have a source where we can find it. Now, other characters in the Bible, there's stories of Rephaim. They were giants. Today, Rephaim means ghost in Hebrew. But in the Bible, Rephaim are a type of giant. Og, king of Bashan, who was a Rephaim. And then there's, of course, Goliath. Goliath is another Sumerian word. In Sumerian, Goliath is great. Gal, we talked about great, is similar to the Hebrew Gadol. Goliath is a greatness or even greater. Goliath is something we use even now to say about something that's gigantic. It's Goliath. The same meaning has applied for thousands of years. Okay, here's our first original Hebrew here. Vayir'u b'nei ha'elohim et banot ha'adam ki tavo hinei v'yikachu lahem nashim b'kol ashar b'charu. The children of the gods saw. In plural form, the word b'nei is plural, children. If it was singular, it would say ben, and meaning son. Ha-Elohim, it's the gods. It's not the name. If it was the name of God, if his name was Elohim, it would say b'nei Elohim, meaning Elohim is the name. But it doesn't say that. It says the children of the gods saw the daughters of man were fair and attractive and took them, all that they wanted, as wives. Later on here, Hanephilim, Hayu ba'eretz ba'yamim hahen v'gam acharei kena asher yavau b'nei Elohim el banot ha'adam v'yadu lahem hemei hagiborim asher me'olam anshe Hashem. These characters, Nephilim, these fallen ones, they were in the land in those days, and also afterwards, during the time when the children of the gods saw the daughters of man were fair and attractive. These were mighty men from a place called Olam. They were men of Hashem, the name in Hebrew. So men of renown, men of reputation. Zechariah has found that the word Shem could be a mistranslation for the word rocket ship. That which is something that is remembered by memorial. Now, if that's the case, it could make more sense. Because, let me show you how the English is translated here. And this is the English version of this Hebrew Bible is what I copied this from. This intentionally changes the meaning so you cannot have children of the gods be the translation. So, everywhere in the Bible, Elohim means God. Except on this sentence, Elohim all of a sudden means, where is it? The sons of the rulers. An intentional mistranslation put in because one of the purposes of the Bible is to teach that there's only one God. How can you teach there's only one God if your stories come from multiple God stories? You use a literary technique. You combine all of the attributes for all the different gods into a single word in Hebrew, and you call it Elohim, and it remains plural because it's the only way to make sense and keep the original meaning. What else does this say? It keeps the word Nephilim here. It says the Nephilim were on the earth in those days, so it used to translate Nephilim as giants. After many years, we know that. And also afterwards, when the sons of the rulers, again, would consort with the daughters of man, who would bear to them, they were mighty, who from old were men of devastation. Okay. That's not what it says in Hebrew. It says they were mighty men from Olam that were men of either reputation or men of the Shem. But all of a sudden it says devastation. I cannot figure out why that is there and why it says that. But, you see, instead of saying Olam is a place, Olam could also mean, let's say, forever in Hebrew. But they use the word old. Well, Zechariah thinks Olam was another name for that Nibiru, that planet. So if they were from Olam, and if that was a planet, these were mighty men from Olam, men of that rocket ship, the Shem. Now look down here. This is a commentator called Rashi. In every Hebrew Bible, Rashi is printed at the bottom. He was a French or Spanish rabbi who lived in 1250 AD. It says here, guess what? The Nephilim were giants. See Numbers 13:33. This is when the spies come in to Israel and they see giants and they say, we're like grasshoppers. We look like grasshoppers to them. So even though Nephilim actually does not mean giants, they were still thought of as giants. So that memory has always been around. And for Jews who study this way, they have never studied without that being there, because Rashi's been there for 1,000 years already, or 850 or so. Okay, let's continue. Okay. Oh, I forgot to tell you this part. By the way, this is why the flood occurred. This is the story before the flood. The evidence that the Bible says why the flood occurred was this. These characters, Nephilim, and sons of the gods, were having sex with mankind, females. They were mixing races. They were creating hybrids. God of the Bible did not like that. Okay? And therefore, the people were worthy of being destroyed, and a flood was going to come. But, like the story in the Bible, the flood is an impending disaster that is well known. And the God warns one person to save him and his family. One chosen person is the savior of the civilization. But what happens after the flood? Well, here's what happens. After the flood, we know that Noah sends out birds, and the dove catches a branch, and the dove saves the day, and Noah could come back. Noah builds an altar to God, and God, now it says here Hashem, because in the Hebrew version they don't say God's name. They say Hashem, which means the name. So the name of God is said the name, Hashem. Hashem smelled the pleasing aroma. Well, that's unusual. Why would the non-physical creator God of the universe in the Bible care about the smell of meat being cooked? And what would that have to do with, oh, I will not destroy you now because all of a sudden I smell the pleasing aroma? Well, That's one of the ways we can find where the original came from. Because in the Hatrahasis story, once again, what was happening during this flood? These Anunnaki gods were up, lifted up, and looking at what was happening. And you know what? They weren't happy about it. Because Ninti, the one who created humans, was weeping for them. She will always weep for them. The gods wept for their country. They were satiated with grief. They longed for beer. They loved beer. Thirsty as they were their lips. Now they were in ships and they didn't have proper supplies apparently because they were really for 7 days and 7 nights. Now, in the Mesopotamian story, now, by the way, the word Noah, who is in the Bible, the savior of the flood, is known by several other names. The oldest form of his name is Ziasudra. Then there's Utnapishtim, and then there's Etrahasis, and then there's Noah. 4 characters that are the same. They are chosen by their God to save them families and themselves in a flood that's predictable. After 7 days and 7 nights, which is how long the flood lasted in the Mesopotamian version, it was over. In the Bible story, it's like 9 or 10 months. Guess what happened? The gods smelt the fragrance. They gathered like flies over the offering. They came for the smoke offering. A little unusual. Gilgamesh, same thing. The gods smelt the fragrance. The gods smelt the pleasing aroma. The literary people who wrote the Bible must have just loved that line, so they kept it in. But what they did was keep in a direct copy from an older document that we can see. They copied the line. And they attributed it to a non-physical being, a trait of a physical God, the desire of the good smell and the desire to eat, which is the memory left behind after thousands of years of the people reading and hearing these stories. Now there's another point that's important here. This is what God talks about in the Bible a little bit after. He says, "But flesh with its soul, its blood you shall not eat. However, your blood which belongs to your souls I shall demand. Whoever sheds the blood of man, by man shall be blood. For the image of God he made man." So there's a direct prohibition against killing over here, because the soul and the blood and the flesh is holy in a way. So basically, even from the beginning, there are moral lessons being taught, and that's very important. Okay, the Tower of Babel story. There came to pass, when they migrated from the east, they found a valley in the land of Shinar. Shinar is the word Sumer. Sumer in English, Shinar in Hebrew. They said to one another, "Come, let us make bricks and burn them in fire. Let us build a city and a tower with its tops in the heavens. Let us make a name for ourselves." That's the word Shem again, which possibly could be a rocket ship. So if they were trying to build a gigantic tower, lest we be dispersed across the earth. Now, behold, they are of one people with one language for all. Come, let us descend and confuse their language, that they should not understand one another's language. First of all, it sounds like a great time to be on earth. Everyone's communicating and working together. I don't know why the God of the Bible had a problem with that. Now, let's say they were building a skyscraper to reach heaven, and you're on the mountain next to their skyscraper, and you're laughing at them because they're not up at 100 stories. You're on a mountain, you're taller than them. So is it realistic to think that they were building a tower made of stone that is going to be so high they can reach heaven? Or is it possible that the word Shem has been mistranslated from the beginning? And if Zechariah is correct that Shem means rocket ship, what they were trying to do at the Tower of Babel was build a launch tower, or maybe something to emulate their gods. They saw what their gods were doing and they wanted to repeat it. They wanted to be like them. So they tried to build something that emulated that. Because I simply don't believe they were building skyscrapers. It makes no sense. But once again, we find that that's not an original story. Because from an old thing in the Ashmolean Museum, this is again from Samuel Noah Kramer, man had no rival. Harmony-tongued Sumer, that means the land with one language. The great land of the me of princeship. Me was those little microchip things I talked about, which had knowledge or something. Tu and Lil in one tongue gave speech, and Lil gave us language. But what happened here? The Lord of Eridu, endowed with wisdom, changed the speeches in their mouths, put contention to it, unto the speech of man that had until then had been one. Enki changed the languages in this story several hundred to thousands of years before the Bible God changed the languages at the Tower of Babel. The same theme, the same story. What's not in here is why. That the people were trying to... here is not the story of trying to build a tower. But the Harmony tongue Sumer, of a land with one language, has been changed forever. And it happened several thousand years before the Bible picks it up. But it makes sense because these are the stories that have been around for thousands of years. When you finally get around to writing the Bible, you can't start from scratch. You're telling history, and the history has already been discussed for thousands of years. So you take the stories that were already around. Oh, wrong way. Moses. Now here's where we come into some problems, because Moses is the greatest prophet of the Bible. All religions of Judeo-Christian background have the basis in their Old Testament. Everything has to be correct in the Old Testament for everything that follows it to be correct. But the story of Moses' birth is not original, because Sargon the Great, king of Acadia, 2300 BC versus Moses at 1250 BC, 1,000 years plus before Moses, Sargon the Great was conceived in secret, put into a basket of rushes, placed, covered the lid with pitch, put into the river, left to float in the river until he was found by a noble person and raised to be king of his people. And Moses was conceived and birthed in secret, put into a basket, covered with pitch, put into the river, found by the Pharaoh's daughter, a noble woman, and raised to be king of his people. So there's a real problem when the main prophet of the Old Testament has borrowed stories about his life. But also let me tell you why it makes sense. First, if Abraham came from Samaria and he took a lot of people with him, they didn't just eliminate their history, they brought it with them. But he obviously converted it to a single God story from multiple gods. Moses was brought up as the Pharaoh's son until he realized that he was not. He was educated with all the knowledge of the world. The Egypt of Alexandria, which was not destroyed until much later by the Romans, Moses had access to. He was brought up to be Pharaoh, and he was educated as a prince. So he had access to all these ancient texts. So the story was obviously available to him and to other people. But what about the miracles? What about the floods and this kind of stuff? Well, unfortunately, Moses was also not the first person in history to turn a river to blood. That was Inanna's claim to fame as well. Inanna Ishtar, she was a little upset that she couldn't get her way with some of the king or the priest of the area. All the wells of the land she filled with blood. All the groves and gardens of the land she sated with blood. The male slaves could drink nothing but blood. The female slaves could fill up water, could fill up nothing but blood. Again, this is from Samuel Noah Kramer, one of his books. History Begins at Sumer is the name of the book. Any book by Samuel Noah Kramer has stunning stuff like this. And now the biblical version. The river, and they changed to blood, and they shall become blood. There shall be blood throughout the land of Egypt. The river changed to blood. The river became foul. Egypt could not drink water from the river. The Egyptian magicians, necromancers, could do nothing to stop this. Now, is it possible that the river turning to blood was a red bacteria that grew and poisoned the river? It's possible. But it's also possible that the story of that miracle was borrowed from the earlier story. And in fact, borrowed in such a way that we can actually see the quotes still in there. Turned to blood, satiated with blood, they drank nothing but blood. Same story. Different time frame, different point of writing to prove a different point of view. Okay. That's sort of the end of the Bible stuff that we're doing here. Let me just make a comment about this. It's if a person believes in the Bible, then they have to believe in the source material that made up the Bible. You can't take one without the other when they're using each other's stories and themes, and they're both using it together. Now, if you don't believe in the Bible, and you don't believe in any of the ancient stories, and you don't believe in any depictions, that's also okay. But I don't think you can be consistent to believe in one without the other. And they didn't just leave behind those stories that the Bible picked up, because you saw the depictions of their gods, the descriptions and knowledge that they should not have known in their time frame. So a person has to justify, if they don't believe in the original source material, how did they have some of this advanced knowledge? The planets, the mathematics, the knowledge of precession. All of these things that are way beyond their time frame, that should not exist in their time frame. To me, my belief comes from the evidence. It proves to me, and my belief comes from that. That's the physical data that anybody can study for themselves. All of these texts you can order from Amazon or Barnes & Noble or from universities, and you can see all of them yourself, and you can read them for yourself. You can read them in the original Sumerian and Akkadian, and they'll translate for you in English, and you can even pronounce the Akkadian and the Sumerian and sort of get used to the sounds. Okay, this is from Mexico, the tomb of Pakal in Palenque. A lot of people have seen this. This is a replica that you can buy in the Mexico City Museum of a coffin lid. This is a 8-foot-long coffin lid that covers the tomb. He's dead, Pakal, of course. He's buried underneath this covering. He's supposed to be going up to heaven, and there's possibly demons, and he's on a travel for the netherworld and whatever. So it begs me to ask the question, if he's dead, why does he have to have a breathing apparatus hooked up to his nose? Why does he need to have his head on a headrest protected? What is he doing on his back? He's supposed to be dead and straight and stiff. Yet his hands are working levers. His feet seem to be moving too. This is not a very restful position. There's little stuff that looks like this, could be translated as exhaust. And he takes off on his back. Now again, from what we remember from space travel, taking off on the back is the best way for the body to support weight on the spine. Are we seeing technology being depicted here? Or is it just fantasy from some ancient artist from 1500 or 500 AD? Of course, my opinion is that it's technology because it's consistent with everything we've seen before. It's not inconsistent with it. If this thing was on his ear, it wouldn't make sense. If this thing was over here, it wouldn't make sense. But it all makes sense in the place that it's in. Once again, it's consistent with reality. The Great Pyramid of Egypt. The Great Pyramid of Egypt is the most perfect building on earth. Yet it's also a scale model of planet Earth, or at least of the northern hemisphere. The x-axis is the radius of the northern hemisphere. The y-axis is the equator. The size, or the scale, is 1/43,200 to the size of the real Earth. That number is very familiar to me. 43,200 is a precessional number. And I'll show you how that works. What they left behind in the building of the pyramid was to leave sort of a code. Now, when you go to Egypt, they're going to tell you that the pyramid was built in 20 years during the flooding of the Nile off-season, where they would have been having to flip 20-ton stones like a deck of cards in Vegas. It's just not possible. There's millions of stones in the Great Pyramid. It was obviously built over a generational time frame. The ground plan for Giza matches Orion's belt in the year 10,500 BC. The fact is that the pyramid is so perfect that if you look down the 480-foot length of it, it doesn't deviate more than 2 inches. If you took a laser-guided beam, you would be able to connect it to the other end. First of all, to get a scale model of the Earth means you had to have known the size of the Earth. You would have to have seen the Earth from the air and measured it. You can't do it from the ground, and you can't do it 10,000 years ago. Also, 43,200, that's a precessional number. Here's how it works. We talked about that 3,600 year and that number of their 3,600 year. That was the time frame that they calculated for that planet Nibiru's orbit, 3,600 years of our years. This number 43,200 is 12 cycles of 3,600. Once again, 12 comes up. But it's also something else. It applies to humans. 10 fingers, 10 toes. This is 20 zodiacal ages. So 2,160 years times 20 is 43,200. And 3,600 times 12 is also 43,200. They left a code behind that connects our base 10 to their sexagesimal. But who's talking about that? They don't tell you any of this when you go to Egypt. It should not be, if what we've been told has been true. But it is the reality of what is there. So what we've been told has to be changed, not the pyramid. Also found in Egypt. Perfect models of what airplanes in flight could be. Is that shocking now, after all that we've seen? Not to me. There was a lot of knowledge being passed through. Another thing found in Egypt, 3,100 BC, carved from a block of schist. What is the point of this object in 3,000 BC? It doesn't make sense. They used to fan you with big feathers. What is this, an air conditioning thing? It's a flywheel. There's no purpose for it in the ancient world unless there's technology to use it for. Plus, look at how perfect it is. I mean, it's just wonderful. The Egyptians have incredible stuff. And if they were to come out and say, guess what? Come to Egypt because we have evidences of aliens and technology, more people would come. But they don't want to give up the right to their own history. They want to insist that they built it. The tomb of Abydos, or I'm sorry, the Temple of Abydos, the ceiling panel. Now, this is the older panel that was revealed after the younger panel fell off, apparently during maintenance or cleaning or whatever. And the close-up version is this. These shapes and objects are up here. I mean, this is just an uncanny shape here. Now, I don't know if the ancient aliens were actually using helicopters, but it's just such a close match that it's unbelievable. And again, there's things like here looks like Luke's land speeder from Star Wars. I mean, and then this. Now, I don't know if any of you remember, but some of the original little Hittite glyphs where there was this little guy in a radiating chamber. There was this little thing at the top, and it looked just like this. That's for you to decide if this is actually depicting a helicopter or not. Because obviously professional archaeologists won't agree with that. They will laugh. They have laughed back at me. Uproarious laughter was the term from James Oberg of NASA when I confronted him about this. And this was featured by Hoagland on a special and stuff, which was pretty interesting. Here is, in the top, is a battery from Iraq. And this is a lot of people think there's some kind of, not only technology, but electricity being shown in some ancient depictions in Egypt with these things, with snakes, meaning electricity, and these black and white wires, and this transistor-looking thing. So after everything we've seen, it would seem to me that, you know, they don't care that we don't believe what they're depicting. They're just depicting what they see. They're simply drawing what they see. They don't have a motive behind it to convince you of anything. They're just recording history. And we are lucky enough to be here and see it. What I have here in front of me is some quotes from the Dead Sea Scrolls that I'm going to read to you because I have not made a slide of it. The Dead Sea Scrolls, which were found in a cave in Qumran in Israel, are from the 1st century BC and AD. In the beginning, a lot of the Christian researchers were trying to show that the Qumran activity and the caves was the beginning of Christianity. But what was happening was they were not releasing all of the tablets and the correct translations until the new version of the Dead Sea Scrolls in English, which now has everything in it, allegedly. And here's the stuff that they left out until recently. This is from the Book of Giants. That's the name of the book. The fragment is this: about the death of our soul. And all his colleagues entered, and Ohia explained to them what Gilgamesh had told them. What? Gilgamesh in the Dead Sea Scrolls? Are you kidding me? And judgment was pronounced on him, and the guilty cursed the princes, but the giants rejoiced over him. And then later on, first of all, there's a name here, Shemhasa, which is very similar to Semyasi. Shemhasa, their father, and he told a story in the congregation of their colleagues, the Nephilim. I saw wonder in a dream that night. Here in one quote is Gilgamesh, giants, and Nephilim mentioned together. Well, now that connects the Dead Sea Scrolls, which is the most modern era, and that's the proof that the version of the Bible in Hebrew is the same version that we have. What they found in the Dead Sea Scrolls matches what we have now. So they know that the copying has been accurate for thousands of years. But obviously the influence is finally being accepted and allowed to come out. Gilgamesh, giants, and Nephilim. And here's called the Genesis Apocryphon. Behold, I thought then within my heart the conception was due to the watchers, in Hebrew Iri, in Sumerian Igigi, and the holy ones, and to the giants. And my heart was trembled within me because of this child. Then I, Lamech, approached Bath Enosh, my wife, in haste, and said to her, by the Most High, the great Lord, the King of all the worlds, and ruler of the sons of heaven, until you tell me these things truthfully, if tell me this truthfully, not falsely, by the King of all the worlds, I will swear. Okay. This is the birth story of Noah. Noah was born to a woman whose husband said, I didn't make that baby. And the light shone from his skin. He was bright. So they go to Methuselah, the oldest one. I, Methuselah, ran to Methuselah, my father. And he said, what's going on? Methuselah said, don't worry about this child. He's a product of the sons of heaven, and he will become a savior to your society after a great calamity. The real birth story of Noah is very similar to the birth story of Jesus in many ways. And it's in the Dead Sea Scrolls. That is also part of the problem with religions in general, or people that are tied to the story, the mythology. The lessons of religion are wonderful. How to become a better person, how to treat your neighbor, how to have a better life. But when you're caught up in the stories to make that your faith come true, that's the problem, because a lot of the stories are simply borrowed from older sources. So a person has to ask themselves, what do you do? What do you believe? What do you follow? And for me, I look at the lessons of what the teachings are. That, I think, is the most important, and not the mythology and the stories. But also, you can see that when you study more than the limited thing that you're presented with in any civilization, if you study more, you get more knowledge out of it. There's more going on. The Sumerian stories have so much more detail in them than what other books later edit down. And unfortunately, they edit it down in a way that takes away a lot of the interesting stories. Because, for example, in the flood, when these aliens, Anunnaki, are weeping for humans, it shows that they really did care. They knew a flood was coming and they didn't warn everybody, and they had their reasons. Part of it was they claimed that humans were too noisy. We were reproducing too much. Literally. And Lil was the one who didn't like us. But Enki, who created us, loved us. And he's the one who told his favorite human to build the vessel and escape the flood. And the relationship changed between gods and man in the historical record after the flood. Before that, they held kingship for themselves. After the flood, they gave kingship to humans. They allowed humans to rule the city-states and the priest-kings to have a very high position, and they helped us recover and gave us a lot of the things that we still think of today as just normal, like the calendar and keeping time and the counting system and a lot of our moral codes and ideals, and obviously, from what I've shown, a lot of the religious and biblical stories as well. So what happens to me personally is I think this opens up even more. This gives me high self-esteem, because now there's some place to go on earth and I can do research and I've got something to study. I want to see more of this physical evidence because I like to see it with my own eyes. I like to take my own pictures of it, and I hope that some of you will as well. Do the research on your own. find your evidence. Go see it. It makes your life worth living, and it gives you a real good purpose to do. And I hope that you'll have fun doing it.